The morning Sloane got the call about her promotion, she was standing in the hospital parking lot with an ultrasound photo in her hand, and tears she hadn't decided yet were happy or not. She'd been holding it together for weeks. The nausea that came in waves every morning around 6, the exhaustion that hit her like a wall at 3 in the afternoon, the way she'd been hiding crackers in her desk drawer at work because the smell of the break room coffee made her stomach turn. She hadn't told anyone yet, not her mom, not her sister, not even her best friend, Tanya, who could read her face better than anyone alive. She'd told herself she was waiting for the right moment. The truth was she was scared. Scared of what the moment would mean, scared of what came next. But standing there in the parking lot, holding that small black and white image that showed something barely the size of a grape, she felt something shift inside her. A warmth that moved through her chest so quietly she almost missed it. This is real, she thought. This is actually real. She was going to tell Marcus tonight. They'd been together for 2 years. Moved in together 8 months ago. He'd talked about starting a family, not in an abstract way, but in the specific, detailed way that made her believe he meant it. He wanted a daughter, he'd told her once, lying in bed on a Sunday morning. He wanted to teach her how to ride a bike and how to change a tire, and how not to let anyone talk her out of her own dreams. Sloane had laughed and said, "You've thought about this." He'd smiled and said, "I think about it all the time." She drove home that evening with the ultrasound photo tucked inside her purse and a plan forming in her mind. Candles, maybe. His favorite meal. Something that felt like a moment. Because this was a moment. This was the beginning of everything they'd talked about. She stopped at the grocery store, picked up the ingredients for his mother's pasta recipe, the one he'd taught her on their 6-month anniversary. She bought a small card with a blank interior, sat in the car outside the store, and wrote inside it, "You said you wanted a daughter. Here's your chance to practice." She was smiling when she pulled into the driveway. The house was dark. She didn't think anything of it at first. He traveled for work sometimes. Presentations, client dinners, the occasional conference. She'd gotten used to the quiet. She set her bags on the counter, pulled out her phone to text him, and saw 3 messages she'd missed during the drive. "Running late tonight. Don't wait up. Everything okay, just work stuff." She stared at the screen. The texts were spaced 40 minutes apart, which meant he'd been sending them while she was driving, while she was smiling, while she was carrying a small piece of paper that said, "Here's your chance to practice." She put the phone face down on the counter and started unpacking the groceries anyway. She told herself it was nothing. He worked hard. She worked hard. This was just life. Timing didn't always cooperate. She'd tell him tomorrow morning. She'd make breakfast instead of dinner, and it would still be a moment. She cooked the pasta alone, ate most of it standing at the kitchen counter, because setting the table for one felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. He came home after midnight. She was already in bed but not asleep. She heard his keys, heard him move through the kitchen, heard the sound of water running in the bathroom down the hall. When he finally came into the bedroom, he moved quietly, like he was trying not to wake her. She lay still and let him think she was asleep. She didn't know why. The next morning, he was gone before she was up. Another text. "Early meeting. Talk tonight." She held the ultrasound photo in the morning light from their bedroom window and looked at it for a long time. Then she put it back in the envelope and slipped it into the nightstand drawer. Talk tonight, she thought. Okay, but tonight came and went, and then another night and another. He was distracted in a way she'd learned to recognize, the careful distance of a man who was managing something he hadn't decided yet to share. She'd seen it before, early in their relationship, when he was negotiating the terms of a new contract and didn't want to get her hopes up until it was finalized. She'd learned then that he processed things privately before he brought them to her. She told herself that's what this was. She was good at telling herself things. It was a Tuesday when everything broke open. She was at a charity gala, the annual fundraiser for the Children's Hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse practitioner. Her hospital had a table. She was required to attend. She'd been to the event 3 times before and knew the routine: cocktail hour, dinner, auction, dancing, home by 11. She arrived with her colleague Petra, who worked in the cardiology unit and had a talent for making small talk with donors look effortless. They found their table, got their drinks, and circled the room the way you were expected to do at these things. Sloane saw him from across the room. At first, she almost didn't process it. Her brain registered the back of his head, the specific way Marcus held his shoulders, the particular angle of how he stood, before it registered that he was here, at this event, which he had never mentioned. She started to raise her hand to wave. Then she saw the woman beside him. She was tall, in a deep burgundy dress, And she was clearly pregnant, 7, maybe 8 months, the kind of visible that couldn't be hidden and wasn't trying to be. She was laughing at something, her head tilted back slightly, and Marcus had his hand at the small of her back in a way that was so natural, so practiced, that it looked like muscle memory. Sloane's arm came down slowly. She stood there with a glass of sparkling water in her hand and watched as Marcus guided the woman toward a cluster of well-dressed men near the bar. She watched him lean in to say something to the group. She watched the group laugh. She watched one of the men shake Marcus's hand and then reach out to touch the woman's shoulder, in the familiar way you touched someone you'd been introduced to before. Someone who had been explained to you. Someone whose relationship to the man beside her you already understood. His fiancée, someone nearby said, low and social, meant for the person next to them and not for Sloane. He proposed last spring, I heard. She's due in September. The sparkling water was very cold in her hand. The room was very loud. Sloane set her glass down on the nearest surface, a high-top table near the entrance to the corridor, and walked, very deliberately, toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. She pushed through the door, stood at the sink, and looked at herself in the mirror under the fluorescent light. Last spring. She counted backward. They had been living together for 8 months. He had proposed to someone last spring. Last spring they had been 8 months into living together. The math didn't work, and then, horribly, it did. Because last spring Marcus had taken a week-long trip he called a work conference in Austin. She remembered because she'd asked if she could come, and he said it was mostly meetings, and she'd be bored. She put both hands flat on the counter. She breathed. She did not cry. Because crying in the bathroom of a charity gala was something she was not going to do. She thought about her mom, who lived 20 minutes away, in the same neighborhood where Sloane had grown up. She thought about the card in her nightstand at home. She thought about the ultrasound photo in the envelope. She thought about the way he'd said, I want to teach her how not to let anyone talk her out of her own dreams. She straightened up. She smoothed the front of her dress. She went back out into the gala. She found Petra at the table and said very quietly, I need you to get me out of here in about 10 minutes. I'll explain later. Petra looked at her face and said, I'll get our coats. She didn't confront him that night. She drove home, walked through the front door of the house they shared, sat down on the couch and tried to build a list of explanations that could make sense. An old friend, a cousin, a work contact with some kind of complicated situation, but she knew the sound of that hand on someone's back. She knew exactly what that looked like. She went to the nightstand. She took out the card she'd written. She read it once. Then she put it in the back of the drawer, under a stack of old receipts, where she didn't have to look at it. She lay in the dark for a long time, one hand resting against her stomach. Okay, she thought. Okay, think. She was 31 years old. She had a career she'd worked for. She had a life she'd built deliberately, carefully, the way you built things when you'd grown up, watching your parents make the mistake of not thinking far enough ahead. She was not going to fall apart in the dark over a man who had apparently been living a second life while she cooked his mother's pasta recipe. She was angry. She was terrified. And underneath both of those things, so deep she could barely touch it, she was heartbroken. But heartbreak, she knew, could wait. She had things to figure out first. She didn't tell Marcus she'd seen him. She watched over the next week the specific way someone behaves when they are managing a secret they believe is still intact. He was attentive, almost effortfully so. He brought home flowers on a Wednesday for no reason. He suggested they go to the farmer's market on Saturday the way he used to when they first moved in together. He was warm and present in a way that, under any other circumstances, would have made her feel cherished. She let him. She smiled at the flowers. She went to the farmer's market. She waited. She needed to know how deep this went before she decided what to do. She called in a favor with her friend Denise, who worked in hospital administration and had a gift for discretion. Denise made a single inquiry, and within 48 hours Sloane had a name, Camille Okafor, 28 years old, worked in finance, and yes, engaged to Marcus Whitfield with a wedding date set for November. November, 4 months away. Sloane sat with that information for 2 full days before she did anything with it. On a Thursday morning while Marcus was at work, she began to move things. Not everything, just hers. The things that had been hers before he existed in her daily life. Her grandmother's quilt. The framed photo of her and her sister at the Grand Canyon 3 summers ago. The nursing textbooks on the shelf she'd had since graduate school. The small box of jewelry that lived in the top drawer of her dresser. She moved them to a storage unit she rented with her own credit card. Then she came back to the house and cooked dinner, and was sitting at the table reading when he got home. She'd had almost 2 weeks to think about how she wanted to do this. She had tried and abandoned several versions. Confrontational, calculated, cold. In the end, she decided on something closer to the truth. Not because she owed it to him, but because she needed to hear herself say it out loud. I was at the gala, she said, after they'd eaten. He looked up from his phone. 2 weeks ago, she said. I was there for the hospital fundraiser. I saw you. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Sloane, don't, she said. I'm not asking you to explain it. I know what I saw. He put his phone down. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has been rehearsing for a version of this moment, but not quite this version. It's not what? Marcus. Her voice was very steady. She's 8 months pregnant. You proposed to her last springs. I know when last spring was. He said nothing. I'm not going to do this, she said. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you try to make it smaller than it is. I'm telling you what I know. I need you to not be in this house when I get home from work tomorrow. Sloane, please. I need you to not be here, she said again. Whatever you need to say after that, I'll hear it. But not tonight. She got up from the table and went to the bedroom and closed the door. She lay in bed and listened to the sound of him moving through the house, the low sound of his voice on the phone. To her, she imagined, to the woman in the burgundy dress, and then the front door closing. In the quiet that followed, she pressed her hand flat against her stomach and spoke to no one in particular. It's just us, she said. That's okay, we'll figure it out. The next 3 months were the kind of hard that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It was the hard of logistics, finding an apartment, navigating the lease on the house they shared, telling her mother, who cried in a way Sloane found both comforting and exhausting. It was the heart of explaining to people who had liked Marcus, who had believed in the two of them together, that sometimes you don't know a person the way you thought you did. Her mom, her name was Beverly, though everyone called her Bev, came over every Sunday to help set up the new apartment. Sloane hadn't told her about the pregnancy yet. She was waiting until she felt steadier, and steady felt very far away. Her OB cleared her at the 12-week appointment. Strong heartbeat. Everything exactly as it should be. She drove home alone and sat in the parking lot for a while. Then she called her mom. I have something to tell you, she said. Bev cried again, but differently this time. Oh, baby, she said. Oh, honey, how long have you known? Since before I found out about Marcus. A pause. And you've been carrying this whole time. I've been fine, Mom. Sloane, I know. Come over for dinner. Come tonight. Your father wants to see you anyway. He's just been waiting for me to ask first. She laughed, which she hadn't expected to do. That's very Dad. I know, Bev said. Come at 6. She met Jonah on a Tuesday in November, which would have been Marcus's wedding day. She didn't know that until later. She didn't find out until her sister showed her a social media post, weeks after the fact, and even then it felt less like a wound and more like a footnote. She met Jonah at the coffee shop 2 blocks from her new apartment. He was at the counter ahead of her, and he was trying to explain to the barista that he'd asked for oat milk in, and the barista was patiently explaining that what he'd ordered contained oat milk, and there was a small, polite standoff developing. She's right, Sloane said without planning to. That's what you ordered. I was behind you. He turned around. He was tall, with a kind face and the look of someone who had just realized he was wrong and was deciding whether to be gracious about it. He decided to be gracious. Thank you for the independent verification, she laughed. You're welcome. He paid, she ordered, and when she turned around, her coffee in hand, she found that he had waited. I'm Jonah, he said. Sloane. He said it like he was filing it away somewhere. Can I ask, do you live around here? I just moved to the neighborhood, and I'm trying to figure out where people actually go. I live 2 blocks over, she said. I've lived here for about 3 months. I'm still figuring it out myself. They talked for 20 minutes. He worked in architecture. He'd moved back to the city after 4 years in Seattle, back to be closer to his family after his dad had a health scare. He was 34. He'd never been married. He asked questions the way people rarely did anymore, like the answers actually mattered, like he was paying attention and not just waiting for his own turn. She didn't tell him she was pregnant. She was wearing a coat. She wasn't showing dramatically yet. She just talked and laughed twice and felt for the first time in months like she was in the same room as another person instead of performing normalcy at a distance. Before she left, he said, Can I give you my number? If you're still figuring out the neighborhood, it might be useful to have a fellow newcomer in your corner. You've been here longer than me, she said. 6 weeks longer. I'm basically a local. She saved his number. She told Jonah about the pregnancy on their 4th conversation, sitting in a booth at the diner on Clement Street, with mugs of tea going cold between them. She'd planned to wait longer, But he was telling her something honest about the year he'd had, and it felt wrong not to match it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Because I like talking to you and it feels dishonest not to." He set down his mug and looked at her. "I'm pregnant," she said, "about 5 months. The father is not in the picture, and that's a longer story, but the short version is that he wasn't who I thought he was. I'm doing this on my own. I have a job I love and a family who's shown up for me. I'm okay. I just want you to know before whatever this is." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of retreat, but the silence of someone actually thinking. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That's the whole answer?" "No," he said. "The whole answer is I'm glad you told me and I'm sorry you went through that. And I'd still like to keep having coffee with you, if that's something you want." She looked at him across the small diner table. "Yeah," she said, "that's something I want." Her daughter was born on a Thursday morning in March, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and an opinion about the world that she expressed immediately and at volume. Sloane's mom was there. Her sister was there. Her dad stood in the hallway and cried quietly and pretended he hadn't when he came in. Jonah was in the waiting room because she'd said she didn't want to presume, and he'd said he would be wherever she wanted him to be. And the waiting room felt right, present without overstepping, which turned out to describe him pretty well in general. She named the baby Wren. Simple, she'd decided. Something that didn't need to be explained or justified. Something that sounded like the beginning of its own story. When they finally let her sleep, after the nurses had come and gone, and her mom had kissed her forehead, and her sister had taken approximately 400 photos, Jonah came in quietly and stood at the edge of the room, looking at the small hospital bassinet with the particular expression of a person in the presence of something they were taking seriously. "She's beautiful," he said. "I know," Sloane said. "She looks like my grandmother." He sat down in the chair beside the bed. "How are you?" "Tired," she said. "Happy." Both at the same time. "I think that's allowed." She looked at him, this careful, honest, patient person who had waited in the waiting room and who would, she was fairly sure, wait in whatever room she asked him to for as long as she needed. "Thank you for being here," she said. "There's nowhere else I'd be," he said. Sloane thought about who she'd been a year ago, standing in the hospital parking lot with an ultrasound photo she hadn't yet figured out how to share, waiting for the right moment that kept refusing to arrive. She understood now that the right moment had never been about Marcus. It had been about her, about whether she trusted herself enough to walk through the version of life that didn't have a safety net built in. She'd always thought of courage as something you gathered before the hard thing. She'd learned that wasn't how it worked. You gathered it during, sometimes after. Wren slept in the bassinet with her small hands curled under her chin. Jonah brought coffee from the nurse's station, terrible coffee, in a paper cup which he handed to Sloane with the gravity of someone presenting something precious. She took it. "So," he said, "what's next?" "Sleep," she said. "A lot of sleep after that." She looked at the window at the pale morning light that was just starting to find its way in. "Everything," she said. "Everything is next." He smiled, and she did too.